Hello, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. So, who owns social media within your company? So many different departments, whatever type of company it is, feels like they have a significant ownership stake in a company's social media presence. So, who owns it? Marketing, customer service, sales, HR and recruiting, communications, or does everyone? Demetrios Paraginis is a social media and community manager at Cogeco Pier 1, and he's got great hands on experience across a lot of different verticals managing social. And on this episode, we'll discuss social media strategies, what channels are performing well, organic reach, stock imagery, who owns the channels, and putting the customer at the first of everything you do, including on social. So let's tune in to a social Canadian with a social shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Demetrios, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would please tell us a little bit about your background and your career and your story to date.
All right. Well, I am a social media and community manager. I've represented a few brands on social media for the better part of the last 5 years. I currently work for an IT infrastructure and IT services provider called Cogeco Pier 1, based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And in the past, I've worked in the financial industry for a credit card service, credit card provider up here
company.
in Canada as well. Yeah, small company
Called Capital One.
Yeah, so it came from Capital One. Most recently, I was at a polytechnic institution, so higher ed. The college is called Humber College. Great school up here in Toronto. And I also have worked for an airline, Air Canada, in the past as well, based out of Montreal.
Yeah. Airlines enjoy such good times on social media as well. So then let's talk a little bit about the different backgrounds. You worked for Capital One, you work for a college, you work for Air Canada, you're working for a tech company now. What are some of the similarities and differences when you look at, say, a 30,000 foot view? Can I use an Air Canada reference? But when you look at them from that view, what's some of the similarities and some of the differences that you've seen across such vastly different verticals?
Some of the elements that remain the same are that most or all of the brands I've represented, they take a customer first approach, especially on social.
Thank God.
So yeah, really. Typically it's putting the customer at the center of everything you do, and social isn't an exception for that. So content was geared towards appealing to customers, both current and potential, as well as identifying a type of personality or brand standard in terms of brand language that they wanted to adhere to on social media and on any other public platform for that matter. So those were really some of the elements that were the same regardless of industry, as well as brand responsiveness. So at Capital One, for example, I was in charge of building up a customer service program for a Canadian market.
Mm-hmm.
And customer service was a big part of my day-to-day on social media. But even in my current role right now at Cogeco Pier 1, in a more B2B environment, brand responsiveness is just as important, even if customer service isn't a big chunk of social media activity. So, and what's different in terms of how each brand approaches social media is I found the types of content and the variety of content it is different depending on industry. So for example, when I was working for the college most recently, we seem to have been churning out photo and video kind of on a weekly basis, whereas in this kind of tech / IT space that I'm at now, there's a lot less of that. Not to say that there isn't any of that. There is, but it's just at a lesser, much lower frequency. So there's more sharing of blogs and other forms of copy on social, a lot of stock imagery being used to kind of prove a point and direct eyeballs
Sure.
towards our social media content. And of course, there's more of an emphasis on the content supporting sales and lead generation, more so than higher ed, for example.
You used a dirty word, and you said stock imagery. So
Sorry.
that's okay.
Yeah. So I mean, another big difference is user-generated content and how often you come across it. In higher ed, for example, I honestly sometimes felt I didn't have to do anything. The brand was so
Absolutely.
strong, the
Yeah.
affiliation to the college was so strong. The students would, tag us, mention us in everything they did, and
Yep.
post interesting pictures that we could then repurpose. Whereas, in my current environment, that's, in the B2B space, unless your logo is plastered somewhere where your customers are, or you're giving out swag, or anything like that, it's much harder to grab hold of a good piece of UGC, of user-generated content, than that you can then use for your own purposes.
Fair enough. What's the difference for you in social when you look at it from either a communications engagement type tool versus sales tool? That's obviously changed a lot with paid social taking such a much heavier footprint than it has before.
Yeah, so I continue to see it primarily as a communication tool versus a sales tool. Sure, sales is always going to be part of it, but in my opinion, shouldn't be the most of it. I tend to follow what I call like the 4-1-1 rule. So if you're going to promote, organically, and try to put out content that's geared primarily towards the sale,
Mm-hmm.
that be one one piece of content among five. I know some people like to say 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 15 or whatever the reality is for the business that they're in, but definitely sales should be a smaller piece of it. Your social presence, in my opinion, should be a mix of communicating updates to your following and to the community that you wish to engage with, as well as generally engaging with your audience through your content and painting a picture, telling a story about what your brand's all about.
Yeah.
It's really about portraying an honest image of what you choose to represent and what your services mean. In the grand scheme of things, I used this analogy before in higher ed a lot. I feel that social is like a 24/7 living brochure of what you're all about. Right?
Absolutely.
So if you're only pumping sales, then you probably won't get any.
Yeah.
is what I think. So really, it's more communicating. It's more about communication and engagement than it is about sales. But sales does take up a small piece of the pie.
Yeah. Well, you said it perfectly. It's an honest image of who you are, and social, if anything, should be an engagement tool, and they will tell you that they don't like advertising. So when you look at your ROI with each social channel, whether it's likes or views or shares or tweets or retweets or something like that, what kind of ROI are you typically looking for and sort of setting as a benchmark?
Well, I've worked for different brands in
Yeah.
different industries, and what I found was ultimately that ROI or ROE, return on engagement, it's ultimately what
Right.
you make
Right.
of it.
Yeah.
So ultimately, meaningful engagements is what you're looking for, right? Of course, money is the most important in most cases, and being able to generate traffic to a web page that then turns into a sale of a product or a service is ultimately what we want to achieve at some point. But for depending on the brand, depending on the business, a reply to a post or a tweet that generates a conversation and that sparks a broader discussion between some users may be more important than a retweet or a like.
Yeah. Agreed.
So it really depends on the setting, the industry, and the company. What goals you've set out as a social media manager, right? So what is meaningful engagement for you, and that's how you measure success based on that.
So, what types of content are working best for you? I mean, obviously, video, it lights up and gets a
Mm-hmm.
lot of engagement, but you can get a like out of it, but are you always going to keep people engaged on it? It's another story. And I'm making fun of stock imagery just because I don't like it that much. But what is the kind of content that's worked best for you?
Content that's worked best for me is genuine content, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I know I mentioned stock imagery before, and you said it yourself right now and we said the dirty word at least twice now. But photos that genuinely portray, folks interacting with your brand, your services, videos doing the same thing. Typically, shorter videos have worked best, because we are now. We now have the attention span as human beings of goldfish, it seems, and can't watch something for more than 20 or 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So shorter videos typically
Squirrel.
have worked best for me. Yeah, squirrel. That's right. So shorter videos, even uh, gifts, whether they be gifts that are readily available on social media platforms such as Twitter, or custom made ones you've produced yourself, that you and your team have produced yourselves, to get your point across. And also part of that is channel dependent, right? Like I've always found that the right photo, beautiful piece of imagery can do wonders on Instagram. That's just me.
Well, stock imagery of sharks, I would always encourage that. That's okay. It's hard. Those are not posed though. So, how are you leveraging Instagram stories? What has that done for you?
Well, I'm kind of sad that in my current role, we're not using them yet, or haven't gotten a chance to use them yet.
Yeah.
For the brand that I currently represent, of course, personally, I use them quite often on my own Instagram feed to share the very exciting happenings, or very unexciting happenings of my everyday life with my
Yeah.
following.
Yeah.
However, in my experience, swipe up link is everything. Directing traffic to your website, thanks to the high level of engagement and high view count of an Instagram story, is always useful. So, if you're working with an account or representing an entity that has over 10,000 followers and can take advantage of that, please do if you're not doing so already. And also, the the other side of it's all about access with me, right? So, Instagram stories provide a level of access to an event, a person, or a brand, more so than traditional quote unquote social media content, right? So more than posts of images or videos or anything like that, that ultimately have a limited shelf life. Probably not as limited as an Instagram story, but I find that the access factor, like the fighting FOMO off, fighting that fear of missing out,
Hmm.
is invaluable on Instagram and the stories feature. I use them a lot to cover events in the past, and generally to provide our following with an inside look, um, as to what's going on with the brand in question.
So, what kind of results have you seen with Facebook Live?
It's for me. It's been really good for engaging directly with the audience, for things like Ask Me Anythings or AMAs, and just like I mentioned earlier, just like Instagram Stories, it provides a level of access to you and to your brand that's far greater than a typical Facebook posts, for example. Um, and also, I've also banked on the fact that most engagement comes after the video is done, right after the
Right.
live is
Yeah.
done. You get your following that engages with that piece of content, more so after the fact than when it's going on. But the greater amount of success I've seen from kind of a brand reputation perspective and likability perspective is really the access factor, the
Sure.
type of access that it gives um, the average user into your brand and what you're all about.
So, are you seeing organic reach decline, especially in Facebook? That's something that's a lot of marketers have struggled with over the last few years, but it's becoming more and more prevalent, and obviously Facebook's wrestling with that as well when they keep changing their algorithms. But what issues are you seeing with that organic reach?
So the short answer is yes. So for some time now, um, organic reach has been going down on Facebook, especially for me. I know, like it felt that, especially after Cambridge Analytica and Zuckerberg going in front of U.S. Congress, it was like somebody flicked a switch, and the decrease was
Yeah.
even more dramatic. Kind of over the span of a day or two. Um, yeah, it's challenging to deal with, to try to conquer kind of Facebook's algorithm organically. I'm of the belief that it doesn't mean that organic is dead. It's just that we have to now kind of vary our efforts and spend some time on more time on paid, right? As it is more of a pay to play environment.
Right.
Um, uh, as a consequence of that.
So you worked in listening as well. You've worked with some different social listening tools. I met you at a social listening conference. Talk about what the value has been with companies. I know the one where we met was at a sprinkler conference, but what are the tools that you've worked with across the different brands? Where have you seen sort of the value as these social listening tools really, grow?
Right. So you mentioned Sprinkler. That's one of them that I was using at the time. I've used other tools like Synthesio, Radian
Yeah,
6, Brandwatch, most recently. Simply Measured briefly as well. I'm not gonna advocate for one over the other. I believe
sure.
that it's users perspective, right? If one of these tools is better than the others, I don't know which one that would be. Probably one is, but it depends on the individual or the group of users using them, right? Ultimately, the value of social listening for me, though, regardless of which tool you're using, is basically you're getting a chance to hear what people are saying about you when they're not talking directly to you. So, in other words, you're getting an insight into what's being said about you when you're not in the room. Um, and they offer insights into topics of conversations that are linked to what I call external mentions, so mentions that are not made direct on the channels you manage directly, or that are not made at you on social media. Aside from that, you it ultimately uh, allows you to better understand what your brand is being associated to in those conversations that are happening when you're not around. Um, and main things to look at in terms of differences between some of these tools is what data points they offer. There's of
Hmm.
course price comes into to play. Depending on how much budget you've got. One tool may be more appealing than the other. And another big thing to think about if you're thinking of onboarding any one of these tools is integration, right? So when I was using Sprinkler, for example, it was great to have Sprinkler's listening tool because it was integrated into the platform that we were already using. So we can then compare, data that was coming directly to our channels versus the data we were
Great point.
pulling from external conversations, right? So that's something to look at as well. Of course, ease of use and how reports are generated is something I would advise folks to look out for as well. Ultimately, we're presenting social media data to folks that don't always have complete grasp of social and a total understanding. So if reports are easier to digest, that just makes it a whole lot better. It makes your day to day and your life and your life
Sure.
easier actually. So my recommendation is, try them out, get some demos. I don't believe that any of these guys will shy away from an invitation to show off their products and see which one's best for you.
Now that we sort of look at some of the channels, what does the Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp merger mean to you? Are you using some of these capabilities much? Is it something that scares you? You love? Where's your thoughts?
So I'm not using the messenger capability a lot right now. Of course, it is a great way to interact with your following, especially with some customer service background. Messenger was used a lot at that time. You can basically, as like from a user's perspective, you can communicate with your brand, from the palm of your hand via
Sure.
your smartphone. Open up Facebook Messenger, and two lines above, talking to your cousin Stan or to my friend Kenneth. I'm interacting with my bank or
Right.
or my grocery store or whatever. There's definitely a strong business case behind messenger apps in general, and Facebook Messenger. And the fact that Facebook's decided to group Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp all together, uh, I'm just intrigued by the concept from social media manager's point of view, especially as customer service is part of that. You've got one platform where three of these big players are kind of grouped up, and it'll probably make management of that easier. Um, uh, from a customer service slash interaction with my following perspective, and I'm just curious to see uh, how that pans out, really.
Agreed. So, what are you sort of seeing with Snapchat?
So in my experience, it's been good for, again, like Instagram, directing traffic
Yeah.
to a specific web page, due to the swipe up capability, um, and it's also great to use if if part of your demographic, part of the audience you want to reach is on that platform,
Hmm.
right? And that's a general piece of advice that I'll kind of keep on preaching until I stop freaking in social. Is you really want to be on the channels where your audience is at, right? So in my experience as a social media manager for a college, when trying to entice prospective students, right, the younger demographic, to enroll at your institution, like Snapchat was definitely a tool that we leveraged and saw some success with. And a big part of that was, again, tying it back to user generated content and really using our students, who are kind of like our current customers, as as uh, as thought influencers, and having them generate content for us and really paint the institution in a good light on that channel.
Well, let's dive in a little bit further into influencers and any social media
Mm-hmm.
campaigns you've worked on. What kind of results have you seen, and some best practices to dos and not to dos?
Well, ultimately, I'm displeased by the way that term has been adopted, like working with an influencer. When you mention that to some folks, they right away jump to the conclusion that you're like hiring, Katy Perry or Justin Bieber or
Yeah.
Drake to promote your brand. But an influencer, in my experience, can be anyone that interacts with your product or service. Right? Your best influencers, in my opinion, are your customers. And I've done some work with customers to propagate my brand, if you will. I'll bring it back to the higher ed example. Your current students are also your current customers, and if they're happy with the school they're at, they'll paint a better picture than anyone else, um, in terms of promoting the institution to prospective students, for example. And that can come at little to no cost, as opposed to dishing out thousands of dollars to get a name in there, right? Not that that's not effective. It can be effective depending on the setting, for sure. But I find that there are other ways to go about it, and I would recommend that when we think influencers, we broaden our perspective on what an influencer truly is for our brand.
Agreed. So, what are especially now that you're on more the B2B side, what kind of results have you seen with LinkedIn?
Well, personally, it's been a great Rolodex, and I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now
Yeah, really.
if it wasn't. But I'd say that one area where LinkedIn kind of is, is more useful, um, is organic engagement.
Yeah.
There are a lot more organic engagement than, say, Facebook, for example. And typically, depending on the industry and the business, HR will have like a stranglehold over LinkedIn in some cases. But I strongly believe that it should be, now handled by the social media and community manager. If it's not, um, it is, of course, a key player in B2B. Like, LinkedIn is the main player when it comes to
Hmm.
B2B and it comes to social, right? Whether it's sales folks using it to engage with potential and current clients, or if it's the brand making sure that it's able to reach other relevant professionals with its content to push for that, product awareness and ultimately lead generation.
Well, if anything, LinkedIn is fantastic for keeping you from having to deal with the amount of internet trolls and keyboard warriors that you find on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook and Twitter. And I can imagine, having worked for an airline, you saw plenty of them Capital One, I'm sure as well. Not that they don't have great
Of course.
services, but still, it's where people love to go and vent. At least, what are some of your best practices as to how to keep the negative Nancy's at bay on social?
So the main piece of advice I could give anyone is just use your better judgment. Respond only if absolutely necessary. So if the piece of negative content that's being thrown your way is about a legitimate situation or problem with your product or service that you can fix, of course, take that conversation to the private setting. Don't air, dirty laundry out in public. So use DMs, use Messenger, use whatever other private channel you have at your disposal if you're going to do that. And again, only when you suspect a troll or that somebody's trying to kind of interact with you negatively, don't add fuel to the fire. Only respond when you can improve the situation or potentially fix it, right? If it's manageable. Otherwise, ignore it. You can. I always believe that a brand shouldn't delete or hide any negativity on its pages, for example. However, the option is there for you to use. I've used it when a personal attack, profanity is involved, or generally like unsavory content is posted on there. Some of these social media management tools that we mentioned earlier will actually filter out some of that stuff for you, so it never hits your page when wrong types of undesirable language is involved. So yeah, my ultimate ultimately my one piece of advice is use your better judgment and don't add oil into the fire. Don't give the trolls their day.
Well, and you say that on a social on the native page, but do you keep that same attitude when you're running a paid social ad?
I mean, typically with ads, because they're pushed out to folks that may not, have chosen to interact with your brand. They may not be your followers. I'll typically be more loose with the general guideline that I just went through.
Yeah.
And delete, hide as needed. Basically, is what I would recommend.
Agreed. Demetrios, you sort of covered this earlier, but in your opinion, who owns social? I mean, it is a marketing tool for engagement. It is a communications tool. It is a customer service tool. It is a recruiting tool. It's a sales tool. It's many tools to many departments internally. But ultimately, there is a responsibility of who sort of sets the tone and pace for any organization. And what are your thoughts on who ultimately would need to own social?
Look, like you said it best. Everybody wants a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
And I've been in situations where it's been exactly that. It's been a pie, and it's been sliced up between all of these groups, right? So it's partly HR, partly operations with customer service, partly marketing, PR, etc. In my opinion, and as I mentioned earlier, social is primarily a communications tool, so it should rest with however your communications team looks like. If that's communications and marketing, so be it. If that's communications, more focused towards a PR standpoint, I think they should have the ownership, and that whoever the social media management team or individual is should fall into that reporting structure, if that makes sense. Of course, that being said, this person or group of individuals should support every other piece of that pie. So there should be, a customer service element to it. Of course, when it comes to LinkedIn or Glassdoor or any other web-based tool that has a recruitment element to it, that HR should be given the right level of control or access, and it should really be cooperation. I'm not too big on the term ownership. I think that in any group of individuals or company, you're typically all working for the same goal, right? So there should be some kind of level of cooperation that folks adhere to for the greater good, working for the greater good, of course.
Demetrios, what are your best tips and tricks and best practices for social media?
Given that I've jumped from an industry to another, and have been involved in different environments. My main recommendation, I think I mentioned this one, but I'm going to say it anyway, just in case it didn't, is when you're thinking of, what channel should I be on social, or should I even bother with creating a presence on, whatever platform comes next, you really want to be where your audience is. So you might
Agreed.
you might attend conferences, or other professionals tell you that Instagram is where it's at, Facebook Live or whatever, yada yada yada. But it won't do you any good if the folks you want to reach with your content aren't
Couldn't
there.
agree more.
So it's something you have to take. I think that everyone should take into account. And my best piece of advice for others that are kind of in the same boat I am is don't fear failure. Make mistakes. As long as you fail quickly, fail fast, and fail small, so you don't break down the whole company infrastructure while you're doing it, and that you learn from it, that it's all okay. The world will keep on turning, and you'll do great. That's
Agreed.
my biggest. Yeah.
Demetrios, it is that special time of the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Ready as ever. Lay it on me.
All right, here we go. Twitter or Snapchat?
Twitter.
The 2019 National Football League champion New England Patriots or the CFL Calgary Stampeders?
Can I say my Montreal Alouettes?
You
as
could,
my answer?
but you need to just tear up your visa when you try to cross the border. Or Trump may build a wall. So
I'm not a big, I call it American football because I'm a big soccer fan.
Yeah.
When people say football, I automatically, my mind shifts to soccer. But either or, if whatever toots your horn, basically. Congrats to the Pats for their recent Super Bowl win. Tom Brady. Tom Brady's the best, I guess. Best they ever played.
Number 3, Facebook Live or Instagram Stories?
Instagram Stories.
All right, number 4, delicious Greek food from your heritage, like dolmades, moussaka, and baklava, or Canadian food like beaver tail, Canadian bacon, and maple syrup. How's that for the worst setup ever?
Yeah, that's the worst one.
Yeah.
That's the worst one yet. But I'll have to go with Greek food.
Yeah, well, you can tell where my favorite's Greek food. So,
Mm-hmm.
And the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
This one is a tough one because we don't get much of either up here, I
know.
think. But I'll have to go cornbread.
I don't know if there's a Cracker Barrel in Canada or not, but if there ever was, you would get asked that question. So, Demetrios, where can people find out more about you, follow your thought leadership, hunt and taunt you on social, get your marketing advice, and more?
I typically talk business on LinkedIn, so you can find me there by looking for me by name. And I'm Dimitri, at Dimitri everywhere else. So that's DIMEETREE. I typically will post about my interests. So there's a lot of beer, a lot of traveling, and a lot of soccer on those channels. So get ready for that if you do choose to follow.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Demetrios, for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So there was my conversation with Demetrios Paraginas, a social media and community manager at Cogeco Pier 1, and he's got great hands-on experience across a lot of different verticals managing social. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, with the various platforms, you're likely also using social media as an additional sales tool. Whatever the number of sales posts you use versus other, Demetrios made a great point, and I quote, "Social should be a mix of communicating updates to your following and to the community that you wish to engage with, as well as generally engaging with your audience through your content and painting a picture and telling a story of what your brand is all about. It's really about portraying an honest image of what to choose to represent and what your services mean." I couldn't agree more. Social media for your brand is not just what the brand says, but it's also what the world says you're about, and it's a living and breathing document, if you will. Second, I joke often and poke fun of stock imagery, but in all truth, the content that works best is always genuine content. It's content that shows your audience genuinely acting with your brand. It's authentic and will resonate. Third, So while marketing should technically own the channel, in my opinion, your entire company should have a significant ownership stake since it communicates with your customers, puts out brand messaging, leads to sales, helps you recruit, and more. Remember, customers don't see what goes on behind the curtain, they only see how you communicate with them. However, what's most important, that especially with social, with the language and responsiveness on a platform and everything else involved with social, it is imperative that you put the customer at the first of everything you do. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It's been an honor for me to spend this time with you in order to discuss another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. So in the immortal words of Mr. 305, don't stop the party. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.